Nations. Our main pro-policy speaker is Tristan Malhotra from University High School. And our main op-policy speaker is Nima Malzgani from University High School.
I love you all equally.
We are Trojans.
Yes, there is. You know the signals? 2, 1, 30. Okay. And now the chair will appoint 6 minutes to the main pro-policy speaker for an opening speech.
Hi guys, my name is Tristan Malhotra. I go to University High School. So this debate is about the United States specifically leaving the United Nations. Now, I'm going to argue this from the perspective of what's best for the United States. You see, the United Nations was designed after World War II to stop, to prevent wars, to prevent things like the Israel-Palestine conflict, to prevent things like the Vietnam War. But so far, the United Nations has really failed to do so. And because of this is because the United Nations itself has not really that much real power, if you think about it. The United Nations can offer suggestions. They can tell countries that they should do something. They can tell countries that what they're doing is wrong, but they can't really enforce anything themselves. The United Nations, I don't know if any of you guys watch Jon Stewart, but if any of you guys know me, you know I love Jon Stewart. And I saw one episode a couple months ago where they actually interviewed delegates from the United Nations, and all they had to say about the organization itself is all of the infighting that goes on between them. They asked about, like, who do you blame for the Israel-Palestine conflict? And they would say, oh, this so-and-so country is preventing us from passing something or drafting legislation or something like that. And the United Nations itself is just a flawed organization, in my opinion. The Security Council of the United Nations are the 5 pretty much, I used to call them tenured countries in the United Nations. They're US, Russia, China, the UK, and France. Now, if you know anything about foreign policy today, you know that the US, Russia, and China aren't exactly friends. So anything that we want to suggest to the UN to tell other countries to do something, to make a suggestion, it'll likely be vetoed by either Russia or China because our interests just conflict that much. And you might ask, like, what is the cost for us to actually be part of the UN? Well, we spent in 2010 $7.7 billion to fund the United Nations, and it has gone up every single year since. And on top of that, we spend money on these peacekeepers that are pretty much the United Nations military who goes to these countries in crisis and tries to keep the peace, but can't actually shoot at anyone, can't really do anything of value in these countries. They're just like standing there with their guns, but they're not allowed to shoot at anyone. And we have to fund these people on top of the $7.7 billion that we spend to the UN itself. And if the UN is going to, if there are so many countries involved in the United Nations that are going to veto what we want, then we're not going to be able to go out and change the world in a sense that do it for the better, because there are going to be countries with conflicting interests to ours that we don't think is right. For example, the Israel-Palestine conflict, just to show you how little power the UN actually has, the UN asked Israel and Palestine to have a ceasefire for a certain number of hours or days, and the first ceasefire was broken after, I'm pretty sure, about an hour. They didn't have to follow these rules. It was never enforced that there was going to be a ceasefire. It was just merely a suggestion. And the United Nations, it's just one instance of the United Nations not having any power. Now, back to the peacekeepers. During the Rwandan genocide, there were people being killed by the millions in Rwanda. And the United Nations sent these peacekeepers to try to stop this killing, but they really couldn't do anything. If you saw the movie Hotel Rwanda, you saw how futile this was and how little the United Nations actually did to deter this crisis. This was a genocide. You don't call regular wars genocides. This was a massacre. And if the organization that was designed to prevent such atrocities from happening couldn't do that, then how can we trust it at all? I give the remainder of my time to questions. Thank you.
Okay, Tristan, I love your speech. And as a Chinese, I really want you guys to do that.
I know you do.
So, but my question is, what about your alliances? Your alliances American alliances depends on Americans' protection in United Nations. What if Americans just say, okay, I'm done with you guys, what are they going to do?
is NATO not separate from the United Nations? I'm not as educated on that specific part of this, but if we maintain our alliance in NATO and leave the United Nations, it would be something different, I think.
But isn't it at least better to try to work towards international cooperation and action through the United Nations and trying to reform the UN instead of just leaving it altogether?
That is a good question. But I think that back after World War I, when we formed the League of Nations, we determined that that was a flawed system and completely went away from that and created the UN. I feel that in our situation today, things need to be done a lot faster and crises need to be stopped a lot faster. And if we went into it ourselves rather than depending on the United Nations and these other countries to not veto our suggestions, then we could get things done a lot faster and maybe even reform it in the future. But for right now, I think we should leave.
Why would you want to leave behind the one symbol of international unity that we have?
Well, we wouldn't leave it. I don't think we would leave it permanently. I think we'd leave it for now and then maybe start up something in the future when we can actually learn to cooperate better in times of less crisis. Because right now there are so many conflicting interests in the world and so many things that we deem crises that other countries are pretty much endorsing, that we can't really work together in this moment to stop said crisis.
You talked a lot about how UN peacekeepers are useless because they're not allowed to shoot. And then you talked about how they failed to enforce a ceasefire. And I just have to ask, how do you expect a soldier if a soldier is shooting at you, are you going to listen to him to stop shooting at other people? You're going to turn your fire on the person who's shooting at you and telling you to stop shooting. So how is that in any way logical? Like to expect that?
Well, because the peacekeepers, as I said in the Rwandan genocide, were completely separate from the ceasefire in Israel and Palestine. The United Nations.
The speaker's time has elapsed.
Motion to suspend the spit.
Can't do it.
Hold on, there's only one motion. Okay, somebody make a motion.
No.
Motion to
30 seconds.
Okay.
You're not allowed to extend a speaker's time.
The motion to suspend the rules. Do that.
Should suspend the rules and extend the speaker's time by 1 minute.
No, just extend the speaker's time.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Let him finish the question. You can finish the question.
I pretty much
All in
finished my
favor?
answers.
All in favor? Hold on. All in favor of extending speaker's time for 30 seconds to answer the question, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. Okay, you have 30 seconds to answer the question.
Okay, so as I was saying, citing these peacekeepers and the futility of sending in peacekeepers was specific to the Rwandan genocide, which I cited, because they were just standing there and not shooting at these people who were shooting at the innocent people in Rwanda. But the ceasefire that happened in Israel Palestine could have been enforced a different way without peacekeepers, and yet that still wasn't enforced. And that's why I believe that the UN has a lot less power than they do. All right, thank you guys.
Yeah. Chair gives 6 minutes to the main opposition speaker. Neil Mosconi.
Yeah.
Yeah, go boy.
Hi guys, my name is Neil Mosconi. I go to University High School. And so I just want to start this argument by kind of going over the proponents' statements and going over a couple of them and why I think some are flawed. So what happened was they stated that the United Nations has failed to act as an international organization to do a lot of things. I disagree with this statement entirely. Although, yes, we have failed in some aspects, such as peacekeepers in some areas, I don't believe we failed to provide humanitarian aid to many countries, provide economic aid to many countries in refugee camps, and provide a system where a lot of women can get women's rights, because women's rights have increased in many countries thanks to the UN, thanks to propositions passed in the UN. And so they also stated that the Rwandan genocide, we were unable to help the Rwandan genocide because there was a lot of massacre because of that. And although the United Nations could not directly interfere with that, we did provide them with a lot of humanitarian aid. And I feel that that was the best that we can do, and that was necessary, and we did what we had to do. So now on to the points that I wanted to bring up. The US retains a heavy influence within the United Nations, not necessarily as a military power, but as a diplomatic power. And I feel like that is more necessary than having just flaunting our guns all the time, you know? And so because of that, we have major influence on global initiatives that are peaceful and not necessarily focused on a military standpoint. And in the two committees that we have the most influence, I believe that these are the Security Council and the International Monetary Fund, which is the IMF. and also the World Bank, which is also really, it's related to the International Monetary Fund. And so in the Security Council, as the proponents you brought up, the U.S. has the power to veto any resolutions that we do not see fit or we do not see just, as does many other countries such as Russia and the big five powers. And so because of this, we have an ability to exert our influence without necessarily going in militarily and stopping things on our own. Because as the proponents you also brought up, why don't we just go in and do things ourselves? Look how many times that's worked out. Middle East, for example, Africa, for example. The United States intervening on their own in situations where they do not have a developed understanding is unnecessary, and that is where the UN needs to come in, and therefore the United States should stay with the UN for that aspect. And so moving on from that in the Security Council, the International Monetary Fund is also an area where the United States has a major influence. So the way the voting system for passing resolutions in the IMF works is it's based on a percentage of GDP, and that's how you get your vote. So the United States has the highest gross domestic product, and therefore we get the largest amount of vote. It's a difficult way to explain it, but it's kind of the amount of vote you get to pass a resolution. After us comes Japan and Germany. And because of that, we have the ability to provide economic aid to many countries along with the United Nations and not necessarily just on our own. And because of that, I feel like it's just necessary we work as a body as opposed to just ourselves to get economic aid to others as well as humanitarian aid. So with that, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to questions.
How do you feel about UN approval for the invasion of Iraq?
Personally, I do not think that was necessary, but again, I feel that the United States should stay in the UN because they had the decision to go forward with that, and I respect their decision that they made.
I just wanted to say I saw somebody speak. I forget what his name was, but he was the only American who was in Rwanda during the genocide. And basically what he said, we saw happen a lot, was people didn't try to get out or hide or whatever because they thought that the peacekeepers would keep peace, and they felt safe because there were all these guys with guns around them, but that just backfired, and so people actually went to the place where peacekeepers told them to meet if there was something happening, and they just got ambushed there, and it was just totally.
It was devastating. Yeah, the Rwandan genocide definitely was a tragedy in African history over there. I'm definitely not going to promote it. I'm not going to say it was okay that happened. It definitely wasn't. And the UN definitely has they don't have the ability to do any more than what they did, which is really unfortunate. But the debate pertains to why the US should remain in the UN. And I feel that the way that the UN handled the situation afterwards by putting them into refugee camps and providing for them and their families, that was the best course of action that they could take peacefully and maintain their name as the United Nations.
So you're saying that the United Nations provides a lot of humanitarian aid, which I totally agree with you. But if the U.S. did leave the United Nations, couldn't you say that the United Nations could still provide as much humanitarian aid and the U.S. provide humanitarian aid by itself?
Yes, they could, and that would happen. But if the U.S. was able to, discuss with other countries, they could collaborate on these humanitarian aid expeditions and also, joint their actions together. If you understand what I'm saying, and they can provide better humanitarian aid by working together as opposed to being separate bodies.
What about the UN's response towards what's happening in the Ukraine?
So, I feel that the United States should still stay in the UN because they had their decisions heard in the resolution. I'm not aware of any resolution made to go in based on
speaker's time has elapsed.
So yeah, I'm personally.
Nima. Yeah. That's right.
Just to make a quick clarification, when a speaker opens their time to questions, that's strictly for questions and not for elaborations of points. Please keep your questions prompt and have some form of question. Okay, the chair will now have a subsequent pro speaker. Please give me your name tag.
So who's the timekeeper? Thank you. Are you ready? I fully support the idea of international communication. I love the idea of nations of the world coming together to discuss and work towards solutions on the issues affecting the world as a whole. And I think that the UN doesn't always do a terrible job of doing that. But the UN is a deeply flawed organization, beholden to antiquated Cold War rules and colonization-era strictures. The Security Council itself is a direct product only of World War II, a war quickly receding into the past. Why should France and the UK have permanent status, but not Germany and Japan? Well, solely because the Germans and the Germans and the Japanese lost the war, and the Allied powers needed more ways to punish those countries. Now, the General Assembly is even worse. Every country being there means that nothing actually happens. It's a purely advisory body. So the UN has problems, but the idea of it is fundamentally sound. The countries of the world should have some way of talking to each other. So why don't we just reform the UN instead of the US leaving the UN? To find this answer, we must look to history. In the wake of the First World War, the powers of the world, mainly France and the UK, decided that an organization was needed for cooperation between nations, the League of Nations. The League failed, as evidenced by literally everything Italy, Japan, and Germany did between 1936 and 1945. But the concept of the League was still sound. So, did we keep the League? Of course not. The post-World War II powers saw that the League was so flawed and weighed down with the baggage of the past that a new start was needed. The same situation applies to the modern UN. The modern UN is so beholden to the first initial charter of the UN that no one, and is so unwieldy and large, that there's no possible way of making the changes needed to make the UN an effective force in the world today. So something must happen to bring about that change. And the only way to really throw off an international organization as big as the UN is for one of the most important nations within it to leave. And that's what the US must do. The US must say, for the US to truly help the UN, for the US to help the sake of international dialogue throughout the world, it must leave the UN. The only way to bring about any of the changes that the UN desperately needs, is for something huge to happen. And that thing would be the US leaving the UN. This wouldn't mean that the US would not be able to interact with any of the countries in the UN on a diplomatic basis. It would simply mean that the US would be protesting the inefficiencies and poor actions of the UN. And that's the statement that the US needs to make to the UN for the sake of the world. Since I have only 10 seconds left, I yield the rest of my time to the chair.
The chair will now have a subsequent opponent to speak.
Thank you.
Please give me your name tag.
First, good afternoon. I just want to say that as a Chinese citizen, yes, I really want you guys to quit United Nations as soon as possible, because this is the only chance that we will have that for the first time in the history of United Nations, America remains silent, which is good to my country, China. But as an internationalist, I don't want to. Today I want to stand here as half American to speak. Well, even though we say United Nations just a trashy, not really doing things well, but anyway, it's still an international. It still has its international influence. It's still one of the biggest international organizations in the world. And besides, I don't think that this is American spirit. If we just say, well, if we stay in United Nations, we can get everything done, then we'll quit. I don't think that's American spirit. Since I have been staying in this country for 2 years, to me, Americans has the best spirit that we possible. We're trailblazers, we're frontiers. We fight, we work hard, we try our best to build a bright future for the international affairs. So why didn't we just use a spirit in the United Nations? And besides, this is something to be criticized in the United States. This country has such a great power that nobody in the world can actually really stop it. Even though we say China and European Union and other countries are started racing, but no matter standing up politically, militarily or financially, no one can. There's no any single country can really compete against the United States. So instead of to keep the power in a cage, well, you Americans always say that, to keep the power in a cage. Why did America wants to quit the United Nations? What if a USA choose to quit the United Nations and choose to do whatever it wants to do to ruin the international order? I love this country, but still we need to pay attention to what is going to happen. And besides, what if American got? What are those alliances going to do? They're going to scare to death. Think of that. America has one of the strongest power in United Nations, which means many countries need American support, needs Americans' idea to let them keep speaking to keep protect their own interest in there. But what if America just say, okay, I'm done with you guys, hasta luego? What is that doing? What is that going to be? Those countries are going to be scared to death, like Japan, like some other countries. Take an example, my country, China. What if my country, China, just to control to ask all the third world countries, that everything that benefits America and benefits the capitalism country will vote nay. What is that going to be? It's going to ruin Americans' interest. I have to. Anybody wants to?
Motion to suspend
Motion
the
to
rules
suspend the rules and extend speaker.
You don't have to suspend the rules.
Motion to extend speaker time.
Second.
No, by how long?
30 seconds.
Till he finishes.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is followed. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, I still have 3 points. Let's be fast. Okay. Technically, the General Assembly still have the right to say we can declare. It is correct to declare a war with any nation. It's theoretically this is going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen, but theoretically it will. What if any country said, let's go to declare war with America and vote that in General Assembly? And what if it passed? What is that going to be? Everybody's going to attack United States. Our enemies going to come and raise up.
Your time has elapsed.
Anyway, vote for con. Thank you very much.
We will now have the subsequent proponents. Are there any proponents and speakers?
Motion to suspend the rules and go to one speaker.
I like the point.
Is there a second to that? Wait, are you?
I was
Proponents?
No, I'm a con.
Are there any proponents and speakers? Are there any subsequent proponents and speakers?
Motion to suspend the rules and go to one speaker.
Wait, you can't speak. Okay. Are there any motions on the floor?
Motion to suspend the rules and go to
I
one
second.
speaker.
Okay, does anyone second that motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion passes. We will now have a con speaker.
I have 2 points.
Okay. We have plenty of time. You guys will have a chance. Second speaker. Yes, you can start.
Okay. I'm an active member of the Model United Nations in my at Uni High School. I'm Elon, by the way. I go to University High School. And there are a few things I noticed. Now, for the most part, I'll say this right now: the UN is not a very effective organization. It has very little military power. It can't really start ceasefires, for that matter. Tristan brought it up, but it has a very big influence economically. So Nima brought up the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and I want to elaborate on that. So the way the IMF works, and he was very close, it works based on. You're wrong. At one of our delegations in Northern California, I was representing Germany in the IMF,
And the way it does work, he was very close. It's based on contribution. Every country contributes a certain amount and you get a certain percentage of votes based on your contribution. Now, contribution does correlate with GDP, so he's right in that sense. But what actually happens in the IMF particularly is because the United States has a ridiculously high GDP, it can contribute ridiculously high sums of money. So right now it has around 15 to 17% vote share in the IMF, which is ridiculously huge. Japan, the second largest country, has 6%. Germany, the third largest, has 5%. Now, the first thing I noticed in the delegation is if I wanted anything passed, I'd have to go to the United States. Why? Because he or she had so much power. So if the United States was not in the IMF, the entire structure of the IMF would not be the same. Because the United States partially runs the IMF, and because the economy of the United States is in and of itself stable, and because the world economy is partially run off United States Treasury notes, the United States has a lot of say in the IMF. And what it says, particularly having to do with ex post facto loans, international interest rates, at least those that pertain to the United Nations, and things like that, it has a lot of power there. And if the United States wasn't in the United Nations, the whole system would collapse. Another point brought up was the Security Council. And the United States should stand for our own reasons. If the United States was not in the Security Council, we can't protect our own interests. For example, Israel, if the United States was not in the United Nations, Israel would have very, very little say in the United Nations, since the United States roots for Israel most of the time. The odds are, perhaps, that Palestine might become a country. Now, the US has vetoed this for the past 20 years or so, perhaps longer. So we must protect our own interests, whether or not you agree with them. Last point is that the United States...
Speaker's time.
That's not a motion, you have to give it a amount of time.
1 minute.
The motion is to extend the speaker's time by 1 minute.
Yes, exactly. Thank you
Is
very
there a
much.
second to that motion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Yeah, your time is extended by 1 minute.
Okay.
Second speaker, please.
Last point is the United States really is the core of the United Nations. We founded it. We founded it with the United Kingdom, France, and a few other countries. Without us, it will end up like the League of Nations did. Remember what happened with that? We started it, and then we left, and then Germany took over Europe, just like Jacob mentioned. And that didn't really go very well, I don't think. So the spirit, like Henry mentioned, the spirit of America is not to leave. If it's really in ourselves to stay. We need some international representation. It's our last stake. It's the last place where people actually like us internationally. Most people around the world don't like the United States.
There you go, man.
So that's it. Thank you.
Are there any proponents and subsequent speakers?
Motion to previous question.
Second.
It's a bit early.
Well,
Motion to suspend the rule to another opponent's speaker.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Are there any subsequent opponents speakers? Are there any subsequent opponents speakers?
wait, hold on.
Yes.
Previous question means we go.
No, we didn't do a motion for previous question. We did a motion to suspend the rule.
I actually motioned a previous question.
No, I said we're doing his motion. Sorry. It's too early to do a motion to this question. I was responding to Henry's motion. Are there any opponents speakers? Okay, if there's no opponent, Henry, did you?
I really have 2 points.
Okay.
Well, what about that? We should.
Are you want to speak? All right. Against resolution? Yes.
Yeah, please.
No, it's okay.
Well, it's okay. Let her do it. I know the deal.
No, it's not.
If you respect the speaker, you have to go.
Okay. Hi. I do not think the United States should leave the United Nations. First of all, because some of the speakers said that we don't do much, and I would argue with that. Just by being in the United Nations, we're forming a platform for unity across the globe. We have a way to respond to things like a world war. We have, even though we don't have the power to use the peacekeepers, like they mentioned before, there is, okay, well, if we give the peacekeepers the power to shoot people, just think about that. Like, we can't just give the UN power and then just I'm falling over myself in my words. Okay, it's contradictory to say that, oh, we need more power, when we are the ones who say we can't support tyranny, right? So if we give the UN more power, it would just, how would we know that we weren't using it the wrong way? Another point is that it doesn't matter if we don't get things done as fast. What matters is that we're there and we're fighting to get things done. That's the whole thing about democracy and having our opinions heard. It's not a fast way, and you're always going to find somebody who opposes what you say and who doesn't think like you do. But that's the whole spirit of the UN, is to try to find a solution, not to try to say, oh, I have more power than you and we should do things my way. And I think that even though the UN is broken and we do need to fix it, we cannot leave. If we leave, it would just be like saying, we don't want to be a part of you guys, and so we're gonna start, it would just be an act of, I think it would be seen like the other countries would kind of turn against us. So, yeah.
Motion to previous question.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. We will now move on to the closing speeches, beginning with the opposition speaker, Nima Mascani.
Nima! Go, Nima!
All right, hey guys, so you guys have heard a nice pro speaker and a bunch of opponents and subsequent speakers, and I'm glad I got a lot of subsequent con speakers. Thank you. And so yeah, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you guys that the UN doesn't have flaws. It definitely does have flaws. And I do believe that we can work together with the United States in the UN to try and fix them. We shouldn't leave the United Nations and say, okay, you guys worry about yourselves, fix yourselves, or like disband altogether. We'll be over here doing our thing. Because whenever I like to think that whenever the US tries to do their own thing, it doesn't really go very well. Again, look at the Middle East, look at things that have happened in Africa, et cetera, et cetera. Second of all, our position in the United Nations as of now is very firm. We are very powerful in the United Nations, and we have a say in what happens in the world. And even if we were to do things on our own, yes, we would have a say, but this way, at least we're collaborating with everyone and getting every country's individual opinion. And I do apologize for what Iman brought up, like about me not bringing the right information. It is true that it is based on what you give to the IMF, and that's how much of a vote you get, and it is related to GDP, so that's why I brought that up. So yeah, again, the basis of my argument is saying, why would we leave the United Nations if we maintain diplomatic power within the United Nations? It just doesn't make sense, first of all, and why would we want to break our international alliances when we could just keep them as they are and work on strengthening them and the United Nations as a whole, not just worry about ourselves. So thank you guys so much. And I urge you guys to vote for the call.
Yes, go for it!
The main propaganda speaker will not have 3 minutes to stand.
Hi again, guys.
Whoa.
So there weren't very many proponents and speakers today, but that's okay. I have Jacob, and that's all that matters. All right, so I have a few things that I want to address about what the con speakers have said. So first of all, a lot of the con speakers come up here, and they've admitted that the United Nations has flaws, but they've kind of diminished these flaws. These flaws occur in the very basis of the United Nations itself, the very basis of its charter itself. In one of its articles, it said the Security Council may investigate any dispute or any situation which might lead to international friction or give rise to a dispute. Okay, if they may investigate any dispute. It never says they can enforce any policies. It never says they can go out and solve any dispute. They can investigate. It's so diminished. The UN is so weak that that the reforms we'd have to do to the UN aren't going to be minor. The reforms we'd have to do to the UN would be to disband it and form something else based on a completely different charter, which actually gives it some sort of power. Now, onto another point where the Khan said that we have a lot of diplomatic power in the UN. And we do. We have a lot of diplomatic power in the UN, being part of the Security Council, having a large majority of the vote. But this diplomatic power itself can be shut down by the veto by the other countries in the Security Council, like Russia or China. But with the IMF, we do have a lot of power. We have that large percent of the vote. As Iman said, what was it, 15, 16%?
17.
17%, okay. But if we have so much power to control international economy, it would be like having a lot of power to control the economy of countries that we don't even affiliate with. We don't have the sufficient knowledge, or we don't know what their best interest is to control these economies. And therefore we have too much power in this sense. So if we remain in the UN, we'd have so very little power in the things that we actually have knowledge about, which is diplomatic relations and these atrocities that are happening around the globe, and so much power in the things that we don't have much knowledge about, such as other countries' economies. Now, the Khan speaker also brought up that that the UN provides humanitarian aid, and we pay $7.7 billion to the UN for them to provide humanitarian aid, but we can provide reparations by ourselves. We don't need the UN to provide humanitarian aid if we can go out and do that ourselves. So by separating from them, we can actually go out and do the things that we think are important for the other people in this world, the other countries in this world, and provide the reparations that we think they need, rather than just have these reparations maybe shot down by the Security Council. The UN is pretty much a shark with no teeth. You look at it and you think, wow, it's such a big organization. These guys must have so much power. But if you really look into it, you see that it has very little actual power. So we should disband from it, create a new alliance. We don't have to abandon our alliances. We can stick by the countries we've aligned ourselves with and have their backs. But we need to reform it in a more major way than just saying it. Thank you, guys.
The resolution reads, resolved that the United States should leave the United Nations. All those in favor of this resolution, please raise your right hand. Well, it's promise with one. These are all in favor of the resolution. Please raise your right hand and raise it high.
For the love of China.
Well, it's definitely gonna pass.
Once again, Tristan, for the love of China, I will throw.
All those opposed to the resolution, please raise your right hand.
Oh dear. Once again, I want the American people to proceed. Because I'm a cross citizen. I'm waiting for this for 42 years.
All those abstaining from the resolution. With 11 in favor, 38 opposed, and 14 abstentions, this resolution fails.
Whoa. Oh gosh.
We will now pass out. No, sorry. Yeah, we will now pass out the best speaker ballot. So if I can have some people come up and help me do that.